Hi, I'm John Gatewood, founder and CEO of Gatewood Wealth Solutions, where we are on a mission to help individuals and families become and remain financially self-reliant. Welcome back to our weekly Market Insights broadcast. Every Wednesday, we cover the week's top news stories related to the market, economy, and your portfolios, so you can be better informed when making decisions about your money. With me today is Aaron Tuttle, our Chief Investment Officer. Welcome back, Aaron.
John, it's good to be here.
You know, I thought that last week things are going to maybe settle down between last Wednesday, when we had the Senate race, until the inauguration on the 20th. And lo and behold, we had a lot of things happen, didn't we?
We said that it was going to be really loud last week, and that turned out to be probably an understatement.
I mean, holy cow! You think of the things that have happened. You know, you had the all those protesters storming into the Capitol. Mm-hmm. You had Twitter canceling or banning Trump's account for life.
Right.
You have the Congress yesterday was trying to get Vice President Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment,
yes,
which he did not do. And now they're looking at the impeachment proceedings once again. But who would have thought all this would happen in 1 week?
Well, it's weeks when decades happen, right?
Weeks when decades happen. We're back at it.
Right. I'm wondering if my return policy for 2021 is still effective. Can I send it back?
Yeah, you might have to. But it'll be interesting, you know, even despite all of this, the market has been pretty steady.
Yes, it has.
I mean, that's the thing that's kind of interesting, is you have this unbelievable emotional reaction out there among society, right, about all these things, yet the market has hardly even made a whisper.
Well, I would think, especially if you're paying attention Tuesday and Wednesday, the idea that whatever the market is doing is reacting to the news, that should divorce you from that opinion. And we have said that a lot of times, that there's usually just some type of correlation, but it's not necessarily causation with what's happening in media and other things in the market. The market's going to do what the market does, and it's usually not a single item in the news that's causing it to move one way or the other. But media likes to simplify things because they want to sell advertisement. So,
well, I think that's important because, you know, you have we've heard some conservatives worry about the market just tanking as soon as Biden is inaugurated, or you have others that are concerned that socialism is going to take over, and now our economy and our market is going to go down to zero. You know, none of these things are going to happen. There are a lot of factors that go into the market, and that's really what we want to do, is to help people understand, despite all that noise, what actually matters when making decisions about their money and their portfolios.
Right. Yep.
So let's move to the themes that we're covering for this year. I know we talked about this last week. So give us another introduction to kind of what we're going to be doing this year.
So the format is that we're going to continue to watch the coronavirus to see the impact that it's going to have. We're going to continue to watch government policy, whether that is fiscal policy or monetary policy, and just what is happening within our political system, because it is starting to drive. Things are becoming more and more political, as you pointed out, with a lot of the corporations now taking political sides and getting involved into politics, as well as looking at just what's happening to the domestic economy, what's happening in the international economy, what's going on in the stock market, because you need to keep the stock market and the economy separate. They are two separate things, as well as what's going on in bonds, which we think is one of the most overvalued asset class in the world at the moment.
So let's talk about the coronavirus. Where are we with that?
So we continue to see cases and numbers at an elevated level, but if we were to look at an exponential factor, and it's just taking a quarter of a circle, putting it on there, we can see that the ramp up was an exponential growth line. It can't continue that way. It's got to at some point start to turn over, and if we flip that, we can see we are doing that. Doesn't mean that we won't have weeks that are higher than they currently are, but that growth rate is slowing. We hope to pass this over the next couple of weeks to start seeing that average number decline, either a 7-day or a 14-day average. We've talked about mandates and lockdowns and how they're likely not effective, but they continue to be used. California is a hotspot, and they are now putting travel restrictions. So you're not supposed to go more than 120 miles from your home in California. Now, why is it that they are the most strict and they continue to have issues? We think that really what's happening is there's a seasonality to the virus, and it's just going to continue to work its way through. Unfortunately, there's probably not much we can do, at least at a state level. There are certainly things we can do as each individuals, wash our hands and take precautions, etc., that we've done for hundreds of years. But we do think that there may be a turning point where these mandates and lockdowns begin to be used less. Recently, Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, tweeted out a tweet that if you didn't know any better, if we just took his name off of here, you would have said, hey, that's the tweet that President Trump had sent out. Because it's saying the cost is too high, we'll have nothing left to open. We need to redo to go a different way. We need to do it smartly and safely. So he's been one of the more louder advocates for an approach. They're not as strict as California, but certainly up there. And he is now questioning this strategy to try to contain it because it doesn't seem to be working.
Now, you've referenced in past broadcasts about a potential third wave. And I think it's because of the seasonality.
Yes.
So is it because California, the difference in temperature between California and, let's say, the upper Midwest or upper West Coast?
It's temperature seems to have an effect, but so does humidity. In the Sun Belt, why is it that the coronavirus, as well as just the way that we're interacting with each other? So in Florida and Texas, the idea is that once we start moving into warmer months, the climate is warmer. It's actually a little bit drier, but then people start going into air-conditioned environments that are cooler. So that may cause that the way that the habitat is for that demographic is causing that. Well, California, if you remember, was one of the first states to start having cases show up last year, and it was around this time frame. So Washington, Oregon were to follow, and then there were some northern East Coast states as well.
So that'll be interesting to track because you have the offset of the fact that the vaccine is now rolling out. So we'll see how that actually, will there be some mitigation to whatever that future?
The virus also showed up late for these early states in that seasonal window. So their wave could be bigger because they have a higher susceptibility within the population because not as much of the population has actually been infected or they've seen this virus and their immune system has seen it. So my guess is, and it is a guess, is that when we get into New York, a more heavy hit area in its seasonality, it won't be anything compared to what it was in 2020 because the virus it was more prolific at that time when that seasonality came. And the same thing with Florida, Texas, if we get in there. Now, my bet is that we'll still see a rise in those cases because the entire population has not been exposed to the virus.
Well, let's move to the most amazing thing that happened past week, which is not amazing in a good sense, it's just amazing that it happened.
Yes.
And that is the storming of the Capitol.
Right, so I don't think we need to really introduce anybody to what had happened last week. We did have President Trump with a protest, and he said that we should march down Pennsylvania Avenue. He did come out and was slowly, and his words were not as strong as they could be, but said that they were the law and order party. Nonetheless, we had this altercation with people that were not wanting to be lawful. And so that it's certainly been had an impact on people's feelings about President Trump. But a lot of it is it just shows you that how your viewpoint or what your filter is that you're using. Because we went through just this summer with a lot of protests with Black Lives Movement, Antifa, and the way that the news covered it. We have an example here, CNN, mostly peaceful protests versus, I found this one, it was MSNBC, debate after deadly mob violence. Now, these are not bad people. I'm not saying that. I'm just talking about perspective, right? And media tends to be very left-leaning. So I'm not picking on the left. We can go out and find the right because they are hypocritical from the statements that they were saying about the summer violence and the way that you should be treating these protesters, the way that they're talking about this now. But I think it's a really interesting thing to compare. So we had the New York Times talk about a part of a wider peaceful resistance during the summer where Trump incites mob. And then if we go to another one, U.S. Capitol, it's not the first time that people have occupied it. Now, don't hear me say that I'm comparing the level of occupation, the level of violence, but it is not.
There have been attempts on.
Well, yes, but we just saw in the Kavanaugh nomination where those people that were opposing it actually stormed the Senate building and occupied it. They did not use violence, so that it's a more legitimate. It's not illegitimate within our political sphere to do these types of things. That civil disobedience is something that we historically have honored. So also you had mentioned, it's that perspective. We've had different components, and it reminds me of after the Patriot Act was passed, that the left had mentioned this was violating people's rights. We were racial profiling. We were doing all of these things. We were calling people terrorists. And they said one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. And I remember this being said. I was in college whenever this was really popular. And that's true. I mean, most of us that are Americans actually think the Boston Tea Party was great. It's part of our history. And we just honor the people that would do this because of how tyrannical the government was. I think that government was very much a light hand compared to any government that we now have.
Well, it's the taxation without representation.
Right.
So if you think about it, if all the money that's being spent right now through these relief programs is money that's going to be paid back by future taxes, so it's the future taxpayers who have no representation over the dollars that will be spent for future taxes later.
Yeah, I haven't felt, even when I'm represented, I'm not too happy about the taxation thing. But no, we honor these people as patriots, right? Because that's our perspective, that's our viewpoint.
But now in the narrative, though, patriots have taken on a negative connotation in the news.
Yes.
So now it's as though a patriot means somebody who's an extremist as opposed to somebody who's standing up for a belief that they have.
Right.
And that somehow in the narrative it implies violence. Wouldn't you say that's the...
Well, it depends on who you're talking to. So in 1983, the Senate was actually bombed by Susan Rosenberg, and she...
So tell us, who is Susan Rosenberg?
She was an activist, a political activist, and a Marxist, and bombed the Capitol. Clinton, she was pardoned, I don't know if it was pardoned. It was probably some other legal term. But anyway, it was removed from her by Clinton whenever he was leaving office. She's now a member of the Black Lives Matter. She's certainly somebody that people of that board view and respect and would find what she did to be legitimate, just as we find what the Boston Tea Party did as legitimate. As well as in 1954, 4 Puerto Ricans shot up the Congress because they were freedom fighters in their own mind, and I bet if you ask a lot of people in Puerto Rico, they are freedom fighters because it's a U.S. territory, and it has been since the Spanish War, and they felt like they didn't have representation. So it all just depends on the perspective that you have on who is right and who is wrong. Not to say that violence is ever right. You should be doing other means to try to sway and change people's mind. I think Martin Luther King demonstrated how a nonviolent resistance is actually the most effective policy whenever you're doing civil disobedience.
So don't you think that there should have been a responsibility on the part of President Trump to be stronger about not having violence in this standing up for whatever people are thinking about?
It's hard to say and judge. So yes, I would want him to be. This needs to be nonviolent. There was language. There is a video of him coming out. You can debate whether it was timely enough, whether it was strong enough. It was deleted right before the Twitter account was suspended. It's hard to tell, and really, it ultimately will be about how history perceives the event. But what I would say is everything is also becoming just completely upside down from what we had typically would see within the political narrative. So Parler is a company that a lot of classical liberals, libertarians, alt-right, and probably worse, that have gone to there because they feel censored. And the platform allows free speech. They do claim to have things to help mitigate violence and remove those components, but it was also in the crosshairs. So yes, Twitter removed President Trump, but then Parler came under attack, and it was Google Play and Apple App Store removed your ability to download the app, as well as the Amazon web service, which is certainly the best out there. They were going to it for a reason. They removed that and violated the contract, according to Parler, because they have a 30-day notice before their servers would be done. And then when people say that this is a violation of free speech, the left comes back and says, no, these are private companies. They're right. It is not a constitutional violation. These are private companies, and they have the right to decide who isn't on their platform and what the services they're going to provide to them. But think about what argument is being used by the left. They're making a very conservative argument that, hey, this is property rights, these are private companies, what are you worried about? Instead of, private companies are very dangerous. We need the government to help offset their risk. So it's an upside-down world with this response. And now conservatives are wanting to bring in the government and regulate and say that this is a violation. So it just shows you how things are changing politically.
But there was that incident where there was a baker,
yes,
who refused to prepare a cake for was it a lesbian?
I think it was a homosexual couple.
Okay.
I think.
And so then I forget what happened. What was it?
So the ruling was against him, that he had to make the cake, and it was his Christian beliefs that said he doesn't want to make it. So, and this is the nature of where we are in the political environment, especially with social media archiving anything and everything that we say, and being able to pull that up. So just as I showed you before, where just 6 months ago people were saying something one way, and then if you apply it to now, they're not being consistent. So there's that inconsistency. The inconsistency goes both ways, though.
Yes, absolutely. That's the issue. So you're going to argue whichever way you want that's going to support your side. But I know that one of the justifications that people were saying for this action by the part of the big tech was that there was a lot of hate speech on Parler, and then Google had asked them to improve their screening for these types of things, and the claim was that they hadn't done enough to do that. But you know, who knows? I have never been on it, so I have no idea who actually is on it and what's being said. But it seems to me that you see a lot of things on. Well,
I think we can go to Twitter and say and apply the same components. Now they'll say, well, they don't have the policy there. Well, there's always going to be some crazy people on any of these platforms. So it just is what it is. At the same time that they were that the left was talking about violence, there was a trend of pound hang Mike Pence that was not dealt with. And then Twitter just came out, I can't remember what country it is, about the companies are restricting their communication within Twitter, and they're saying you can't do this, politics needs communication. So the hypocrisy is right there, and it's not that anyone is wrong, it's just the world is becoming so more complex and moving so much faster. We don't have really good rules and principles yet put into place.
Well, my understanding is that the Ayatollah of Iran has a Twitter account,
right,
as does Putin.
Yes.
And here are two villains or enemies of
or at least
state,
portrayed that way.
At least portrayed that way. Now, maybe they're good people. I don't know them. I can't judge.
I don't like any politician, no matter what party.
But, you know, they certainly promote things that incite mob type, actions,
Right.
just like this did. So,
Well, one of the risks that scares me, and so I was fresh out of the Marine Corps and was in during September 11th, and had that emotional component to it, and I thought the Patriot Act made sense. These terrorists were out to get us. I think the people that pushed back at it, the ACLU, et cetera, that warned us, were proven right.
let's talk about the ACLU, because they're a left-leaning organization.
Yes.
Yet they also see the issue with civil liberties being squashed
Yes.
or the risk of that, especially
Right.
with these big actions by the big tech.
So, yes, so they were against the Patriot Act. They warned us that a lot of things would happen. I think they've been proven right by history. And when the Patriot Act was passed, it was a bill that likely was written after the Oklahoma City bombing. So it had been sitting there for a while. There's a saying that whatever is on the table in D.C. never comes back off the table. So once it's there, it's just a matter of time before it can be applied. And there's even rumors that President-elect Biden was the author of the Patriot Act. I haven't been able to substantiate that. That could just be rumors. But there's already a Patriot Act 2.0 written. And within that, one of the things that it allows for civil asset forfeiture, depriving your people of rights. And the thing that scares me the most is if they label you a domestic terrorist, which this would broaden that meaning, that they can remove your citizenship, meaning that the Constitution really can't protect you anymore because it's just the government deciding whether they want to apply the Constitution to you or not. Whenever you're in power and you place these things, so a lot of these domestic terrorism and all these charges are really coming at the right at the moment. And it was the right that put in the Patriot Act, right? So the things that you do politically, you have to be very cautious because it's just a matter of time before things change and you're in the party that's out of power.
And well, it also seems to be that the party stances are changing.
Yes.
And that the movement from what was considered a Republican conservative view and a Democratic liberal view is like a moving goalpost.
Yes.
So how do we see that playing out? Because now that we have, and I think we talked about this before, how oftentimes when the president, whatever party is in power at the president level, they start to lose seats in the House,
Right.
and vice versa. So
Right.
how do we see that playing out?
So I think we just have to go over to Europe and look at an example of how that can play out and how it's likely to play out. Because the problem isn't what party is there. It's a problem that all the old principles that we were operating in the 20th century are not applying to the 21st century. So it's just a matter of time before the Democrats are then looked on as failing because it's not parties and the old policies that are working. Things are fundamentally changing inside the country that the politics haven't aligned to yet.
So what is this chart telling
So
us?
this chart is giving an example. So in 2008, there was a center-right party within Italy that had gained power. The red is the Democratic Party, very similar to the Democratic Party here, center-left. And they had gained power in 2008, 2009, and then lost it in 2013 to 2014, so the Democratic Party came in power. Well, what happens whenever you lose politics in this environment where things continue to deteriorate is people then go to believing in their political ideology and saying, well, the reason it didn't work is because we weren't true enough to our ideology. We just really need to double down. So then the Five-Star Movement happened in Italy. So instead of it being a center-right country or political party, it moved to a further right political party and has since regained power. So imagine if, let's put ourselves in the Democrats' shoes. They're in power for the next 2 years, 4 years, however long that is, and they have passed this domestic thing. And then all of a sudden, a candidate that's further right and is more bombastic than President Trump is now in charge of the presidency, and they have this domestic terrorist thing, and you want to protest the things that were happening that needed to be protested about in the summer, but now you can label those individuals as domestic terrorists and crack down on them. So these are the risks that we are facing politically whenever we do things just based on our emotional reaction at that moment.
Well, one of the things that we've been talking about, or you talked about last week or the week before, was the movement away from centralization.
Right.
And I think that from an historical standpoint, it's good to remember that we were not founded on a centralized basis.
Right.
In other words, we were a republic of states. In fact, federal income taxes were illegal.
Yes.
Up until the...
Unconstitutional.
Or unconstitutional. Wouldn't that be the same thing? I guess it depends on whether or not the Constitution and the legal system, you could call it.
I think you could have had an income tax at the state level, just not the federal level.
Right. So that was what I meant, is at the federal level. So, but then, as time went on, things became more centralized,
Right.
especially with the monetary system, because it gave a way for the government then to collect taxes and start to build things like their army.
Yes.
And because we used to be a fledgling army really until probably the 19th century when we created the Federal Reserve, we created the income tax system, and so on.
So, and those were policies that were trying to address things that were within that current environment and the way society was structuring itself. You could scale things up. Scale requires centralization. We're now moving into a different thing, and I think this is ultimately the phenomena that is happening within our country that's causing the political disagreement. The world is changing, and we're moving from a centralized system, so a strong central national type of government, to a decentralized system. And that's painful. So this is globalism, where everything is one big market, to populism, where there's this notion of nationalism, notion of keeping your culture pure, and the populism movement is growing. And it's not just a U.S. phenomenon, it's growing elsewhere. We looked at Five Star in Italy, we see it in Germany, we see it in UK, we see it in especially the Eastern European country provinces. These things are growing. Now, it doesn't mean that you need to be one or the other. Ultimately, I think we'll get to what's known as a distributed system. It's actually the way that the internet works. So whenever we were in the Cold War, everything basically got routed through a system through AT&T in New York. There was a major switchboard. And then people realized, well, if Russia attacks us and drops a missile right over this, we have no way to communicate. How can we come up with a system that would allow us to distribute this? And they came up with DARPA came up with the idea of using a web and an internet so that if any one node was destroyed, that it would find its way through. And this is actually how the internet works. There's a lot of people that will try to go through the philosophy and the fundamental of the things of the society. Since their society is so, they view the world through the internet, it's not surprising to see the world start to mimic the way that that system is organized.
So just like there's been a centralization of authority into the federal system, you also see the same type of concentration of power and centralization into the tech companies.
Yes.
And as a result, you have now the opposite movement happening. So with the idea of the tech companies and the way that information is now, we don't really own our information. Once we put stuff out there on the internet electronically, that information is grabbed by all these large players. Yes. through the big data systems. And then they manipulate that data to, for whatever needs that they want for advertising, influencing opinion, and so on. The movement now is, how do I get my information back so that I control it? That's the decentralized system, right?
Right.
So that I'm controlling my information. So for example, if you have a doctor, they send you to the patient portal. Well, that portal is not controlled by me, the patient. It's controlled by the doctor or the facility. So I have to get access through them. Whereas the flip side would be, if I had my own electronic vault, I would then give access to whatever medical provider that I see anywhere in the world, and then I would then own that data. So that same movement now is starting. I was reading today, we were commenting about one of the fellows who was instrumental in getting the internet out to the public, who's now an MIT professor, is now working on a new internet where the user controls the data rather than the receiver. So what other things are we seeing out there?
Well, I think we're seeing just that. So personally, I don't think there needs to be any type of legislation or anything to come after Twitter, Facebook, Amazon. The market is already taking care of it. I think Twitter's down about 10 or 12% from its high right before banning Trump. And if you think about it, it only has so much growth left for the population. And if you just remove people and you've really damaged your brand with some of your users or a large swath of your users, it makes sense that you're going to hurt your market share cap. Amazon, if they have the web service and you now are looking at that and saying, wow, the risk of them destroying my business is real if they decide that they want to take me off of that server. And once you start doing these things, I think they happen. So what's going to happen is more decentralization. And Gab is probably more, if you're going to use a spectrum on extremeness, Gab is further to the right of Parler. And they've already gone through this scenario where they had to go out and they built their own servers. There was a 750% increase in traffic over the weekend. And Parler was the #1 downloaded app. They say, yet to be seen, but they say they'll be back up within a week. And then all of that ability to control them is removed because they're decentralizing and they're not outsourcing and globalizing, they're decentralizing and bringing the control back in. Same thing with the records. We have Bitcoin as a decentralized packet, and it's really, even though Bitcoin is really cool, I think the biggest groundbreaking thing is their ledger system of being able to not need a centralized clearing system to transfer the currency back and forth. And we can do that with stocks, we can do it with all kinds of other things.
Now, what's your opinion about China's new effort? They're rolling it out, at least in a small basis, to have this electronic Bitcoin system where everything is done through your phone.
Well, back to decentralization, and I am not one. I think the China's on the rise and they're going to beat the U.S. I think that's exaggerated. I think they have more problems. They're more centralizing than we are. The pain that we're going through right now in our system, and it's painful. It is chaotic, and there are risks. I'm not downplaying that. But I think America will ultimately come out, and it'll be stronger because we're trying all kinds of different experiments. We'll probably be more decentralized. There'll probably be more local control at the end of it at the state level. You had Oregon that passed a law, or removed all federal law for any illegal drug use that you want to do. It's legal. Well, that's completely contrary to the federal system. And whenever Trump was elected, you had all these secession claims from states that lean left. Now you have it from states that lean right. So I think we'll end up with a more federal system than what we have right now. But we also see it in tech. The phones that you have, right? Google and Apple can.
This is an amazing story. The Clear, right?
Where it allows you to own your information, and it's not just the phone. They have all kinds of products. It's a new type of company. It's called a B corporation, which it's kind of weighing that stakeholder component where the people that are using the system, the vendors that are using the system, it needs to be doing things for the greater good. What that means is always subjective. It's just like the one man's freedom fighter statement, right? But it's a different type of company, and they have energy. So you can go out and try to remove yourself from the energy system, so it's decentralizing that. The whole theme is decentralization. And if you go to their advertisements, right now I think this is going to be attractive to the people that are on the right, but it's certainly using the marketing images and the language of people that would be more left-leaning. So like I said, like we've been saying, is politics are not what they were in the 20th century. They're going to be something different.
Well, with regards to the business, though, so one of the things that makes Google, Amazon, Twitter so strong and effective as a business is the network effect.
Yes.
In other words, that they have millions and millions of users. How do you balance that in the economics of a business when you have something like Clear that's starting? Because clearly they will succeed by a growing network effect, right? I mean, that's going to be part of their success. So how do you balance that in terms of business success going forward? Because
it's all going to be the market. It's all going to be personal preference, right?
Because that's going to impact market valuation of stocks and all that.
It is going to have, and the thing is, it's so complex. There isn't likely a political solution. You got to let markets begin to decide, and everyone's going to have their different choices. I don't think Google's going anywhere. I don't think Amazon's going anywhere. However, we did, because of just looking out and the impact that they'll probably have on cutting off a large part of the population from wanting to do business with them, we've reduced some of our exposure, and really we had great gains in those companies anyways. It was time to diversify some. They're still there. We still like them, but we have lowered some exposure, especially whenever we look at how much they've gained and how big of a weighting they were getting in the portfolio. So it's really just letting the market figure this out. And when I say market, ultimately it is just using a phenomena of people going back and forth with assessing their own values, their own preferences, and figuring out where can we kind of get some stability.
So let's talk about the money supply.
Yes.
It's growing.
It is.
So what does that mean?
It's one of the reasons I believe that all the drama in Washington hasn't shown up on the exchanges, is the money supply. We've done 2 very large stimulus packages last year. There seems to be another one on the horizon. Next week we want to take a deep dive into what does it look like with the new government in place on taxes. It's not as bad as many people have portrayed it. And really get into those policies. But this is what's driving the market. And it's very high. And if we look at the bottom, we can see just the change in billions of dollars to the money supply added. And we can see, 2020 was just very, very high in the amount of money creating. And it seems that there will be more of that.
So speaking about the government stimulus, it seems as though the companies that benefited the most were actually the large companies.
Yes.
It was really meant for the small companies, but small companies have struggled.
They have, and they continue
now,
to
there are certainly winners, though. Don't get me wrong. There are certain aspects of that, but a lot of the things that we see out there in the service industries and so on, they are just struggling.
Right. So Zoom was a small company before this, and now it's a big company because it benefited so much. But we did see a drop in small companies' optimism going forward. We see a drop across the board, and it does not look great for small businesses. Now, don't hear us saying leave small cap. Remember, separate economy and market. They're not necessary. They look like each other sometimes, but not all the time. And whenever we look at, like you were saying, what is the impact? Where is this coming from? And it is coming from the lockdowns and different things, because we can see just the unemployment change. If you're in Florida, the blue circles, it's 0.1% higher. And Florida has a couple of them, and they only have one red, which is near Orlando. And think of what's in Orlando, Disney World, right? So the theme parks. Well, that's why the unemployment is there, because they were shut down. But then look at California, look at New York, look at the Northeast. They're down more than 9%. So it was the lockdowns that are having this unemployment effect on the companies. And then if we look at another component, is in the good times, many of the states were raising their minimum wage, but they didn't put the minimum wage. It wasn't just immediate. It's a phase-in. And we're starting to see some of these phase-ins arrive for small businesses. So you're already struggling. Let's say you're a restaurant. You're only at 25% capacity. Your sales are down. And now you have an increase in labor costs on top of that. And we haven't even got to the likeliness of some, not large, but some tax increases on companies that were reduced before. So there's a lot of headwinds that these small companies are facing at the moment.
This is going to be a tough time, tough transition for the small companies.
Yes, it's that K recovery. There are companies that are doing phenomenal, doing great, better than ever, and then there are companies that are really on very hard times. Food banks are being utilized at levels that we haven't seen in this country probably since the Great Depression.
So let's talk about our investment themes and what's working, what's not working. Where do we see our focus so far for this year?
Well, we continue to see inflation risk as being very high. We looked at the money supply. We're starting to see that. So 10-month high for oil prices. There's a lot of borrowing, more borrowing at the municipal level that since 2013. The 10-year is rising. We'll talk about that. So there are indications or anecdotal evidence that we are starting to see that inflation theme begin to pop up. Food prices, I just saw the CPI, haven't gone in there to really analyze it well, but across the board, food prices are up substantially. So that inflation risk, we think, is very high. Any additional stimulus package, we're not saying whether it's right or not, will likely continue to add to this risk of inflation.
Now, I saw that the OPEC countries want to limit the amount of distribution of oil in order to hold prices up.
Right.
How will that impact oil going forward?
Well, it certainly would drive the price up if you lower the exposure, especially if the current administration begins to move towards renewables and green energy, and they deny the ability to mine and extract oil from the parks. Once again, not making a political statement here, just an economic statement. That would reduce the amount of oil being produced domestically. The U.S. is now the largest producer in the country, or the world, so that it would have an effect on the price of oil. It would move up in that scenario.
Now the market keeps going up.
It does.
We're at an all-time high once again.
Yes.
In the S&P 500. Where do we see that going? What's the resistance? And explain to our audience what that exactly means.
So if we look at just the trend line, markets, there's like supply and demand. People are paying attention to these price points, and they're real. Now it may be just kind of a catch-22 type of scenario that the only reason they work is because people pay attention to it. But the phenomena can be observed, and we can see that the trend line is continuing to move up, and there is no resistance because we're near new highs. So the market, once it continues to move up, it'll just continue to move up until something finally breaks. And we would look at that trend line right now at 37.25 on the S&P 500 is where the market is moving. It will probably slow down a little bit, but with the amount of stimulus that's being created, that can keep this going for quite some time. If you're printing money to support asset prices,
your prices are going to go up.
Your prices are going to go up. It will support it. Now, the problem is that can be inflationary, like we said.
Then you have excuse me, you have the value of the dollar.
Right.
You know, with all the stimulus that's been going in, that's been pushing the value of the dollar down.
And there was a little bit of a bounce here last week. It did strengthen. We saw a drop in Bitcoin and gold, which we have a couple of slides here. But it seems that this trend line is moving where the dollar will continue to weaken going forward relative to other currencies.
So what will they do to things like Bitcoin and gold?
If it weakens and they are alternative currencies, they should gain on it against the dollar. One thing so I think Bitcoin will continue to appreciate for some time just because of whenever I look at the technicals, it seems like everyone wants to buy it, and bubbles happen. It is also a known phenomenon. But I think what will eventually kill it is a regulatory response from the governments, and I think that's going to be there. Until that happens, I think this price is going to move up. It doesn't mean it's going to go to zero, but that's what I think the big risk for Bitcoin is at the moment.
Absolutely, the regulatory risk, because right now it's an unregulated thing to a certain extent. You know.
To a certain extent, yes. But the belief or the myth that it's an anonymous ledger system is just that. It's a myth. If you're buying Bitcoin, you can't buy it here on the LPL, who we clear through. If you're buying that, you're buying it on an exchange. You're using a clearing platform. It is very, very much transparent on that system. And those clearing platforms are going to report to the U.S. government because they're a business and they don't want to come afoul of the system. They're not criminals. They're just businessmen. So the idea that is an anonymous system is not accurate. Now there are things that you can do to make it more difficult, but you can do the same thing with cash, right? You can pull it out of the bank, I can pay you, whatever. You can do the same thing with gold. You can transact and do things to help prevent people from seeing it, but it is an electronic system and people can see what's going on. So it is. I wouldn't go as far to say that it's completely unregulated, but it is not controlled by a central government.
So then you've got gold, and normally you would think that if the value of the dollar is going down, that the value of gold or the price of gold would be going up.
And it has, if we look at the trend line, it's certainly retracing some of its move from 2019 all the way up through half of the year of 2020. It's definitely moving in a way that it's hard to understand with all the things that are going on. I think Bitcoin is kind of taking some of that money out that would normally have gone to gold. But if you're looking for an inflation hedge and you balk at the price of 40,000 or 32,000 on the Bitcoin. I think gold is a good alternative to be considered, especially if you're taking physical delivery of it. Now, Bitcoin and gold, these are not recommendations. I want to
right, that's
say
very
that
important.
they're not recommendations. This is just talking about these two assets and some of the ways to view them. Do not go out and make an investment decision based on this talk. Call your lead advisor or your service advisor to have a discussion with them, and know that we cannot sell Bitcoin. So we are regulated as well.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the different asset classes and how they did relative to each other this past week.
Yeah, despite everything that we just talked about on small companies, the small companies trading on the market are still at the top of the relative strength. We do have an overweight to it. We are starting to pull some of our technology exposure. We think the value rotation is starting to gain some momentum, and there are a lot of good companies there. Energy and banks have been doing well, and places that we're looking at, but that doesn't mean that we're removing our overweight to technology, because long term, that's where the growth story is. We still haven't even gotten into automation, and I just saw that Cadillac revealed a flying car as one of their concept cars. So all the drone technology is now making its way into to cars.
So the Jetsons may become a real story.
Right. Maybe we'll press a button and our house will come out of the rain cloud,
right,
so we can be in dry atmosphere.
Our car will just go up in the air and then park
yes,
in the 12th story of our home.
We've already passed that time in Back to the Future. Whenever the car, I think that was 2015 is when they went.
Right.
Yeah, they went 30 years back, 30 years forward.
Right.
So Back to the Future got that wrong.
So the Federal Reserve you have a slide on that.
Yes.
So let's talk about that.
Well, this is
10-year
10-year minus the 2-year. And what this does is gives you an assessment of the spread banks can make. The higher this goes, the higher inflation expectations are, according to this, but also it allows banks to make more money. So the government may slow down on its spending. When has that happened? But if they did, we could see the banks begin to create money outside of the Fed system, and we could still see an increasing money supply. And this is an indication of that. So
right.
saw
Well,
a nice spike.
This is a big spike. I mean,
It is.
was because the spread was, I think, 90 basis points last week, and now it's 115.
Well, in July, we got down to a negative spread. And that's usually a bearish signal for the market, but we looked at the money supply and said we can ignore that. That's more of a noise right now. But yes, we're at 1.15 on the 10-year. And if we go back here, we can see that even though that's a big spike, we've seen it before, and we were much higher back in 2016, 2017. Not a low-rate environment.
No, it was not.
And we're still
that was
lower
a good
than
spread.
and then we can see at the beginning of the year, we were at 1.8 on the 10-year, and now we're at 1.15. Still, it's a big movement for just the beginning of the year.
So what would that do to the price of those treasuries? I don't know whether or not you had a chance to take a look at that.
You asked me that yesterday, and I said I needed a lifeline. So I'm going to go ahead and call Chris.
All right.
So I think it's about a 3 to 4% movement on the downside. So think about that. That's a 10-year treasury. We're just a couple of weeks into the year, and it's already down 4%.
That's a big move for what's considered a safe asset.
Right.
So.
And there could be a long way up.
Yes. So if there's a long way up, that means that you won't be hedging inflation with a treasury bond.
Right.
Well, looks like we're out of time today. And thanks again, Aaron, for your insights into the market. As always, our goal is to sift through the noise so you can be better informed. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the GWS YouTube channel. Have you subscribed, Aaron?
I am a subscriber. I like every video you're in.
Thanks. So just click the button at the bottom right of your screen and you'll be alerted to our future broadcasts. Finally, we'd love to hear from you, whether it's to share feedback, ask questions about your portfolio, or learn more about engaging our firm. Please call the number on your screen and someone from our team will be in touch with you shortly for a confidential, complimentary consultation. So thanks again for joining us today. We look forward to having you with us at next week's Market Insight broadcast.